Chapter 5. The letter CUSTODI of Pope Leo XIII to the Italian people on Freemasonry, December 8, 1892. This document is not an encyclical, but a letter Pope Leo XIII addressed to the Italian people. The Pope expresses himself to his people with more spontaneity and vivacity of feeling than he would in a more official act addressed to the assembly of Christendom. It is worthwhile spending a little time on this letter, for it has retained all its topicality. Quote, "Our country has seen and suffered great evils in such a short span of time, for the faith of our fathers has been made a sign for persecution of every sort. The satanic intent of the persecutors has been to substitute naturalism for Christianity, the worship of reason for the worship of faith, so-called independent morality for Catholic morality, and material progress for spiritual progress. To the holy maxims and laws of the gospel, they have opposed laws and maxims which can be called the code of revolution." End quote. Here the Pope is surely alluding to the, quote, rights of man. Quote, "They have also opposed an atheistic doctrine and a vile realism to school, science, and the Christian arts." End quote. With just sentences like these, one could write a book. The Pope sums up in a few lines all that we have seen unfold before our eyes over the last 200 years. Quote, "Having invaded the temple of the Lord, they have squandered the booty of the Church's goods, the greatest part of the inheritance necessary for the ministers. In this battle against the Catholic religion, what partiality and contradictions there are! They closed monasteries and convents, but they let multiply at will Masonic lodges and sectarian dens. They proclaimed the right of association, while the legal rights, which all kinds of organizations use and abuse, are denied to religious societies. They proclaim freedom of religion and reserve odious intolerance and vexations precisely for the religion of the Italians, which, for that reason, should be assured respect and especial protection." End quote. The Pope goes on, quote, "We do not wish to exaggerate the Masonic power by attributing to its direct and immediate action all the evils which presently preoccupy us. However, you can clearly see its spirit in the facts which we have just recorded, and in many others which we could recall. That spirit, which is the implacable enemy of Christ and of the Church, tries all ways, uses all arts, and prevails upon all means. It seizes from the Church its firstborn daughter, and seizes from Christ his favored nation, the seat of his vicar on earth, and the center of Catholic identity." End quote. Having described these actions, the Pope teaches and warns, quote, "Remember that Christianity and Masonry are essentially irreconcilable, such that to join one is to divorce the other. You can no longer ignore such incompatibility between Catholic and Mason. Beloved children, you have been warned openly by our predecessors, and we have loudly repeated the warning. Those who, by some supreme misfortune, have given their name to one of these societies of perdition should know that they are strictly bound to separate themselves from it. Otherwise, they must remain separated from Christian communion and lose their soul now and for eternity." End quote. The Pope then enumerates the principles for conducting the offensive. Quote, "Masonry has taken control of the public schools, leaving private schools, paternal schools, and those directed by zealous ecclesiastics and religious of both sexes to compete in the education of Christian youth. Christian parents especially should not entrust the education of their children to uncertain schools. Masonry has confiscated the inheritance of public charity. Fill the void, then, with the treasure of private relief. It has placed pious works in the hands of its followers, so you should entrust those that depend on you to Catholic institutions. It opens and maintains houses of vice, leaving you to do what is possible to open and maintain shelters and halfway houses. An anti-Christian press in religious and secular matters militates at its expense, so that your effort and money are required by the Catholic press." End quote. The Catholic press no longer exists. I wonder where one could give his money, if he had any, to the Catholic press. There are a few journals, but there are no more Catholic newspapers. I do not know of any in Italy or France. There used to be the Catholic France, but what has it become? The New Man is very liberal, and Avvenire in Italy is horrendous. It is the most revolutionary newspaper. One wonders how bishops can finance such newspapers. Avvenire is perhaps even worse than Le Monde, because it calls itself a Catholic newspaper, yet it is empoisoned by the same spirit. Quote, "Masonry establishes societies of mutual help and credit unions for its partisans. You should do the same, not only for your brothers, but for all the indigent. May this struggle between good and evil extend to everything, and make good prevail. Masonry holds frequent meetings to plan new ways to combat the Church, and you should hold them frequently to better agree on the means and order of defense. It multiplies its lodges, so that you should multiply Catholic clubs and parochial clubs, promote charitable associations and prayer organizations, and maintain and increase the splendor of the temple of God. The sect, having nothing to fear, today shows its face to the light of day. You Italian Catholics should also make open profession of your faith and follow the example of your glorious ancestors who confessed their faith bravely before tyrants, torture, and death. What more? Does the sect try to enslave the Church and to put it at the feet of the state as a humble servant? You must then demand and claim for it the freedom and independence due it before the law. Does Masonry seek to tear apart Catholic unity, sowing discord even in the clergy itself, arousing quarrels, fomenting strife, and inciting insubordination, revolt, and schism? By tightening the sacred bond of charity and obedience, you can thwart its plans, bring to naught its efforts, and disappoint its hopes. Be all of one heart and one mind, like the first Christians, gathered around the See of Peter and united to your pastors. Protect the supreme interests of Church and Papacy, which are just as much the supreme interests of Italy and of all the Christian world." End quote. Unfortunately, in our time, those who appear subject to the papacy work against it. Those who seem subject to the bishops work against the Church. As for us, they say that we have distanced ourselves from the See of Peter and from the Church, yet it is we who are the best defenders of both, who are the most ready to defend the Holy See and the bishops, insofar as they are the successors of the apostles and the representatives of the Church, but not the liberalism they profess. Pope Leo XIII, so you see, urges us to fight